role in this. You're seeing a presentation from James Barner, who really, over the last several years, led the effort in power planning and in many ways led the state's effort to adopt integrated resource planning and played a leadership role. But what we learned over the last several years is that power planning can't meet the needs of our future, and that it really needs to be a cross-functional effort across all of the power system that engages our public as well. This award was for a study that included 4 different divisions within the power system and 2 different systems. So there were personnel across all the spectrum that played a role in this. And I'd like to just mention a few of their names now. Glenn Berry, Jonathan Flores, Luis Jose Martinez, Julie Van Wagner, Robert Hodel, Farnak Sarbaz, Vin Vangvaravapatar, Jay Lim, Mark Sedlicek, and James Wells. And a special shout out for Julie Van Wagner, who really played a lead role in coordinating this across the power system. I know working in the power system is really hard to coordinate. She's outside of the power system, and she got this thing done and got it across the finish line, and it was an extraordinary job by her. Great job. I'd like to wrap up, and sorry for taking such a short, such a long time, but as you can tell, I'm really enthusiastic about this, and I just am extraordinarily proud, and I feel lucky to be working with these folks. I'd like to wrap up by saying thank you to Reiko and to Nancy Sutley, because they recognized that after this announcement happened and after our power system was really challenged by these really aggressive goals, that the way that we planned the power system in the past would not meet the challenge of the future, and they established a cross-divisional and a cross-system steering committee that led to this study, that led to the groups that came together that said, we need to meet this challenge in a way that's grounded in science and grounded in engineering. So I just really wanted to take a moment to thank you. I assume there's no questions on this, and I really hope there's no technical questions on this because I can't answer them. But unless there's any questions on this, I'll hand it off to James to give an update on the SLTRP. All right. Okay.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Congratulations.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. James Barner, Assistant Director of Resource Planning, Development, and Programs. Pleased to bring the resource plan update. We call it the Strategic Long-Term Resource Plan. In the past, we call it the Ihrp. And firstly, I'd just like to give a little background because the LA 100 study was so important to what we're doing now. The LA 100 study was completed this last year, and the final report was issued on March 24th, 2021. There were many key findings of the study, first of which is that 100% renewable energy is achievable and is achievable through multiple pathways, and that electrification is the key to affordability. We learned about the cost impacts on rates, job creation, as well as resources that are common investments across all pathways to 100%. Following the completion of the study, the Los Angeles City Council has instructed LADWP to include in its planning the new goal of reaching 100% carbon-free by 2035, a full 10 years ahead of California's goal. So you may be familiar with this. This was presented to you in March of last year. These are the LA 100 next steps. This was an attempt to minimize the delay between receiving the LA 100 study findings and then developing the SLTRP recommendations. The LA next steps through this is our recommended next steps through 2030. That include near-term investments and supporting efforts needed to keep us moving forward towards our clean energy future. The first of the steps is accelerating to 80% renewable and achieving 97% GHG free by 2030. Accelerating transmission. There was 10 major projects within the city that we needed to complete in order to bring power into the city and minimize the use of our gas-fired generation. We also had transforming local generation. We issued a green hydrogen request for information on this, and we have plans to construct green hydrogen capacity at Scattergood and to expand hydrogen use within the basin. We're also taking steps to retrofit Haynes 8 to use recycled water for cooling. And then accelerating energy storage to build over 1,000 megawatts of energy storage within the basin and out of basin by 2030. And then accelerating distributed energy resources equitably, deploying 1,000 megawatts of local solar, 500 megawatts of demand response, doubling of energy efficiency, and providing EV charging support for 580,000 vehicles by 2030. And adopting a goal of 50% of DER investment to disadvantaged communities. And this will be more fully considered as part of the LA 100 equity strategies effort that is now underway. So what I'd like to do is show you the progress that we've made internally to date on these next steps. LADWP is actively engaged in executing these next steps and has made significant progress to date. We've provided 55% clean energy so far, and this year, with the addition of Red Cloud Wind, we expect to be over 61% clean energy, and this does not yet include the additional benefits of the Eland Solar and Storage Project that is scheduled for commercial operation by the end of 2023. That will provide an additional 7% renewable energy, clean energy. Regarding the transmission projects, we've made progress on 2 of those transmission projects, Toluca to Hollywood Line 1 and Tarzana to Olympic Line 1, are both in permitting phase, and internal staff has been assigned to these major projects. These 2 projects, along with the other 8 transmission projects, are part of our regular biweekly major projects meetings, where we discuss the implementation schedule and identifying any delays or project obstacles to overcome. Regarding local generation progress, we have received 36 responses from the recently issued green hydrogen RFI, and these responses are now being reviewed, and we are currently seeking external funding opportunities for green hydrogen with the Department of Energy and the state. Scattergood hydrogen capacity and the Haynes recycled water cooling retrofit are currently ongoing. With energy storage, we expect to have 1/3 of our energy storage needs in place by 2023, by the end of 2023, with the existing 20 megawatts of Beacon energy storage and the 287.5 megawatts of Eland battery energy storage, and the balance coming from small customer-sited energy storage. Our goal is to use and maximize the use of solar plus storage investment tax credits to install energy storage outside of the basin, combined with solar PV. In February, we issued a standalone energy storage rolling RFP through SCAPA, and we intend to pilot and demonstrate a long-duration energy storage project for potential use within Scattergood and our other generating stations. Lastly, we've made progress to expand our distributed energy resource programs to reach more customers in disadvantaged communities, and additional findings and recommendations that will evolve from the LA 100 equity strategy study currently underway will be incorporated into the SLTRP process as these recommendations become available. So how does the SLTRP fit into our overall LA 100? So I mentioned the LA 100 study was the first of its kind. It gained significant recognition on a national level and really put LADWP in the spotlight as a front runner in accelerating clean energy. To build on this effort, LADWP will be moving forward with our remaining 2 of the 3 major LA 100 initiatives illustrated here. The LA 100 study was completed in March, as I mentioned, and showed multiple pathways to 100% renewables by 2035 and 2045. We also learned through the LA 100 study that LADWP must be intentional in its planning efforts to ensure an equitable, just transition towards 100% clean energy. And to that end, LADWP launched its LA 100 equity strategies effort with NREL that will include robust engagement with our community. The LA 100 equity strategies is a significant effort to ensure that the transition to a clean energy future is done in a manner that is just and equitable so that all our communities benefit. In short, we need to transition in a way that considers the financial and air quality burdens on these communities. The 2022 SLTRP is our traditional long-term plan that is currently well underway with an extensive advisory group that incorporates research findings from LA100 and builds upon the resource pathways that were identified in the LA100 study. I will be sharing more on the SLTRP in the following slides. So just a little background, what is an LADWP's SLTRP? It's a roadmap that drives the financial priorities of the power system to meet LA's future energy needs, considers regulatory mandates while assessing how to drive emissions reductions and maintain reliability and resiliency in a cost-effective manner. The last SLTRP that we produced was in 2017, and for the last 4 years it was paused while we worked on the LA100 study. Now that the LA100 study is complete, the 2022 SLTRP will build on that prior LA100 study effort. This year's 2022 SLTRP will incorporate several city council motions that were approved following the completion of the LA100 study. And the strategic long-term resource plan guides our internal power system investments and workforce to achieve 100% carbon-free by 2035, while also considering that we need to maintain this 100% through 2045, not just 2035, with continued load growth due to higher levels of electrification. And because of the unprecedented challenge of 100% carbon-free by 2035, the SLTRP will also be supported by parallel efforts that are underway, such as the Integrated Human Resources Plan, as well as a number of risk assessments that will include implementation and constructability risks, procurement risks, operations and maintenance risks, and supply chain risks. So shown here is a snapshot of the overall 2022 SLTRP timeline that we've been following. The key milestones here, we kicked off the process on September 23rd, 2021. We've held a series of 7 AG advisory group meetings from September through December, and we're currently conducting SLTRP modeling is underway. The preliminary results are targeted for the end of April. This April, and public meetings are expected to start in May 2021, and completion and board approval is targeted for September of this year. We are now in the modeling phase that you can see here in the middle. It says conduct modeling in that large arrow there in the middle. This builds on the LA100 modeling approach and methodology and includes similar approaches used in that study. That includes capacity expansion modeling to determine what to build, when, and how much on least cost, best fit. Resource adequacy modeling to simulate weather patterns to determine reliability metrics such as loss of load probability, capacity shortfall. And production cost modeling that includes hourly simulations of the power system over the next 23 years to determine key metrics such as emissions, output, costs, et cetera. And then the public outreach, we'll talk about that a little bit in the upcoming slides. So the scenario overview here that you see is represents a simplified version of what was developed with input from the advisory group over the last 7 AG meetings. These scenarios capture the breadth of feedback received from the AG. This year's 2022 SLTRP will evaluate 3 core scenarios relative to the reference case, which is state law of SB 100. So that's on the far left there. That's the SB 100, which is used as a reference case to be able to compare sort of the results of the other cases to state law. All cases, number 1s through 3, will achieve 100% carbon-free by 2035. There are minor differences between the 3 cases. Case 1, for instance, achieves an 80% RPS interim target, whereas case 2 and 3 achieve a higher 90% interim target by 2030. The difference between cases 2 and 3 is that case 3 includes an attempt to maximize DER, or distributed energy resource deployments in basin. The assumptions between the case scenarios have been updated based on the latest information available, such as electrification load, forecast, pricing of renewables and energy storage based on NREL's annual technology baseline, along with other sources from our own internal LADWP subject matter experts. This was a tremendous effort to coordinate all of the data points with various groups and update and benchmark the model for analysis. So I'd like to talk about the sensitivities. As with previous resource plans, this year's SLTRP will conduct price sensitivities to evaluate bookends on how cost can trend both low and high. This helps LADWP evaluate risk in terms of the range that power system costs may experience in the future. The key sensitivities to the three cases include fuel prices, GHG prices, renewable and energy storage prices. More recently, we have seen supply chain impacts and inflation resulting in an upward pressure on prices across many commodities, and these recent changes will be incorporated in the modeling. The what-if sensitivities are more complex than price sensitivities, and the SLTRP will more fully address risks that we could encounter often beyond LADWP's control. I want to emphasize that the LA100 study did not consider implementation risks, whereas the 2022 SLTRP will consider these implementation risks in the what-if sensitivities. So some of these what-if sensitivities, such as emerging technologies, such as long-duration energy storage that may be not technologically and commercially ready, customer-sided programs that rely on customer participation and uptake that might not necessarily occur as expected, transmission permitting and construction delays, and load uncertainties due to electrification of transportation and buildings. The SLTRP will evaluate the impacts related to cost, emissions, and reliability for all the scenarios and the what-if sensitivities. So shown here is the overall meeting plan that we have. As I mentioned before, we've completed the 7th AG meeting and are currently in the modeling phase. The total plan includes 10 AG meetings throughout 2021. And here it describes the content and the discussions that were included in each of these meetings when we met. The advisory group included many of the same members from the LA100 study process, so we could provide consistency between the LA100 and SLTRP efforts. We have expanded the number of AG members and the number of meetings considerably, where, for example, the 2017 SLTRP included 25 AG members, and this year we've doubled that to 50 members. And the number of meetings has doubled as well, from 5 meetings in 2017 to now 10 meetings this year. So here's some feedback that we received from the advisory group. I'd also like to mention, because the slide looks like it's missing here, but we really couldn't do this without the help of NREL and Community Affairs. They really helped out in the outreach with our AG in reviewing presentations, helping with follow-up questions and coordinating these meetings. So they've been really very helpful in that, and really want to give thanks to Joe Romalo and his team, Stephanie Spicer, Carol Tucker, and Don Cotterell, who have been really helpful in this process. So the advisory group feedback, this is really a very distilled version of what we heard. We heard a lot of comments. Some of the comments that we heard is the scenario should meet the requirements of the City Council motion for the 100% carbon-free by 2035, and California SB 100 being included as a reference case. So we have done that, as you've seen. There was another comment regarding beyond 100% carbon-free, where some AG members advocated for a no combustion scenario with long-duration energy storage in place of green hydrogen turbines. Hydrogen is there's still a lot of issues that the group had pointed out that it's not well understood, and they want us to look more deeply into the cost, safety, environmental impacts, and in many communities, more discussion was felt that needed to take place regarding hydrogen. To address the no combustion scenario request, we've incorporated a what-if sensitivity to explore long-duration energy storage and fuel cells in basin as a potential no combustion alternative to green hydrogen. So essentially, it is very similar to a scenario, but we've included in the what-if scenarios and not in the core scenarios. Of course, what we heard also was cost effectiveness is important, and affordability. We heard that from the AG that capital expenditures should be clearly reported, and asked the question of how will subsidizing and funding power system programs affect individual customer bills, and what will the cost to customers be in order to electrify, switching from fossil fueled vehicles and buildings to electricity alternatives. And to address these affordability concerns, we will include a high-level rates and bill impact analysis for each of the scenarios. There was a lot of also comments about technology readiness and electric load uncertainty. The desire for LADWP to represent emerging storage technologies in the modeling, but at the same time base our analysis on options that can be feasibly implemented rather than abstract generic solutions. They also wanted us to explore low load sensitivity per historical flat and declining trends, and study the effects on cost shifting and rates. So we will be incorporating an active technology innovation process and continue working with industry partners such as Ihrp to better understand the suitability of emerging technologies for power system implementation. And we will also include a low load sensitivity to analyze impact on rates. There was also a lot of concern about equity and air quality, and the burden on disadvantaged communities. In addition to environmental justice, they want us to ensure that disadvantaged communities are not overburdened financially as a result of high bills from potential expenditures at an unprecedented pace. They want us to study the air quality impacts from pollutants such as nitrous oxides on local communities. And to address this, the air quality impact concern, we are partnering with NREL to perform an air quality analysis for each of the scenarios in the SLTRP. And that's very new. We've never done that before. So the purpose of the advisory group meetings will be to provide perspectives on major issues that LADWP will face in the next 25 years, and provide input on the strategic scenarios that were developed to be analyzed, and to provide input on the final recommended resource plan. The public workshops will include community meetings at the beginning of the review and comment period, and we intend to use other communication methods to provide information, and will publicize opportunities to provide further input to the SLTRP team. The public meetings have increased from prior years. This year's public outreach will start much earlier in the process, and include a series of 4 meetings, most likely through online video conferencing. However, in-person meetings may not be possible, as we have done in past years, but we can consider in-person meetings if the COVID circumstances continue to improve. So another a new feature of the SLTRP is to really consider risk factors. We know that getting to 100% renewable is going to be very difficult. And shown here are some of the major risk factors to implementation that will be evaluated and communicated as part of the SLTRP. One of those being cost and rate impacts. We will be looking at modeling the impacts of severe weather, volatile fuel, and GHG emission allowance costs and varying levels of mixes of renewables, local solar demand response, energy efficiency, in order to ascertain the upper and lower bounds of cost and rate impacts. We also will be considering transmission build risk, and beyond efforts to seek legislative relief for permitting, internal groups have been working closely and reporting major project status updates on the biweekly basis, as I mentioned before. The SLTRP model also includes representation of LADWP's transmission corridors, so allowing us to determine where potential transmission bottlenecks may occur in the future. And a very important part of this is the staffing and workforce part of it. The SLTRP will incorporate an integrated human resources plan, which will estimate the staffing resources required to achieve our aggressive decarbonization goals, taking into account retirements and the hiring of new personnel, as well as making recommendations to improve knowledge transfer to new employees. In addition to ramping up the workforce, training time for specific classifications performing the work must also be considered. For example, electric craft helpers and new engineering associates in training have a regimented training program to bring their staff up to speed. We also have a risk factor of electrification adoption rates. Although electrification increases customer demand with a corresponding increase in revenues, this increased demand will require additional generation, storage, transmission, distribution resources that will require increased capital investment. The goal will be to make these investments well ahead of time to support the increased electrification that we foresee coming in the future. And we will be modeling various levels of building electrification as well as differing rates of electric vehicle adoption. And reliability and resiliency, so this is new to the 2022 SLTRP. We will be calculating loss of load hours will be calculated for each scenario using a stochastic approach in accordance with industry standards. And this will allow the Ihrp group to determine the resources necessary to achieve a quantifiable level of reliability. Additionally, impacts of transmission outages will be examined, simulating the effects of wildfires and other natural disasters. We also will be considering supply chain risks as well as implementation and feasibility of these efforts. And just to highlight the last, second to the last slide that I have here, one of the major risk factors that we are working to address, one of the main findings of the LA100 study was that maintaining low rates requires high electrification or simply increased electricity sales. However, this also requires that we expand our distribution capacity to keep up with the increased electricity demand from electric vehicle charging and building electrification. And at present, over a third of our electric feeders, distribution feeders, or 500 distribution lines are currently experiencing overloads. From annual distribution load forecasts prepared by the Distribution Planning Group, we know that we will have a future capacity shortfall at our receiving and distribution stations, and we foresee a need to build or expand at minimum 10 new stations by 2040. This will be an unprecedented level of expansion considering that we have only built 4 stations in the last 20 years. The SLTRP will evaluate and communicate the added distribution capital and O&M investments necessary to support electrification. And once the SLTRP recommended scenario is approved, these additional investments will be included in the power system budget. So the short-term next steps are to complete modeling of scenarios and sensitivities and hold advisory and public outreach meetings to review the findings and provide recommendations for management and board approval. Lastly, the Sltrp will be used as a regulatory document to submit to CEC for Ihrp filing, and will also be used to justify programs and projects and support our rate actions critical to providing funding support to achieve our 100% by 2035 goal. And I want to thank you and be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Terrific, thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Commissioner Brad Hopkins?
I have a question. When you talk about load sensitivities, can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, because there's a range of expected outcomes. You never know exactly what the load will look like, but you could predict based on work that's going on inside the distribution system. For instance, like the Port of LA will be having electrification going on. They have plans, so we incorporate those plans into the forecast. We incorporate what's going on at LAX as far as expansion plans there. Hyperion, for instance, there's expansion plans there as well. So and then just looking at the overall electric vehicle transportation plans that we have, the 580,000 vehicles by 2030 that we know of. We know that buses will be electrified by 2030. We know that we've got the Olympics coming down the road. So we know a lot of these things that get incorporated into the load forecasts. And we know that certain things will not happen. And so we have sort of a low-range load forecast and a high-range load forecast.
You're keeping on top of all of that, what's happening in LA.
Yes, we have groups that are in charge of that, yeah. And we interact very closely with those groups within FSO, and then also our distribution planning group, which is also under me.
Okay. Does air conditioning play a part in a lot of that?
Oh, yeah. So air conditioning is a huge component, as you can see in the summertime when, in the wintertime, as a comparison, our loads are about 3,000 megawatts, and then in the summertime it can get up to over 6,000 megawatts. We've gotten up to a high of 6,500, and I think most of that is primarily due to air conditioning. So that is a huge factor.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. This was very thoughtful, and I think the way you laid it out was very good, easy to understand.
Thank you.
Commissioner Reyes?
So I just have a few questions. You talked about green hydrogen. Hydrogen is a famous topic right now because of the technology that's advancing or not. So how do we ensure that our low-income communities do not suffer any more pollution when we think about combustion, even if we're talking about different types of hydrogen, right? So how do we ensure that they don't have any more of that pollution?
Right.
That's number one. And then the other one is that how do we prioritize our low-income communities to meaningfully participate in energy transmission?
Commissioner Reyes, if I could touch on the hydrogen question, because that is one of the biggest areas of feedback that we've gotten on this power plan. We've gotten feedback from a number of advisory group members who have said, we understand that your forecasted use of hydrogen is very low. If you look at the way that we use natural gas today, it's about 30% of the time today. It's going to ramp down dramatically over the next decade. When we get to the point where we're using hydrogen, we think that the utilization of it will be somewhere between 1% and 5% of the time. So just by sheer volume, the local air quality emissions will improve. But we have gotten feedback that says, well, we understand that, but what if there's high heat days? What if there's wildfires that impact? And you need to use that resource multiple days at a time. we want you to study that. We want you to look at those air quality impacts. And we've agreed as part of this SLTRP to do that. As James mentioned, we've never done the local air quality impact assessment before, and we've never looked at the consecutive utilization before. And so we've responded back to our advisory group members who have asked for that and said, we will look at that and we will try to understand what those air quality impacts are. There's a significant amount of research that's emerging on NOx emissions with respect to hydrogen, so we're very optimistic that that will be very controllable. And just by the sheer utilization and minimizing that, we believe that that will be something that will be well understood, but we have agreed to study it very, very deeply as part of the SLTRP. And I think that this year versus the subsequent years, we're going to learn a lot more, and we'll be able to study it a lot more and understand it a lot more. We also know that there's going to be a significant amount of dollars available to help demonstrate a lot of the technologies, including some of the emissions controls and that sort of thing. So this is something that we take extraordinarily seriously, and we believe that today we've been responsive to those types of questions that say we want the information to be able to understand what those impacts will be. So where we've said in the past we think those impacts will be low, now we'll be able to show that very clearly. So
there's also a crossover with our Equity 100 equity strategies, right? The LA 100 Equity Strategies group with this SLTRP when it comes to the green hydrogen and the pollution impacts and all that, and how the communities will be participating in terms of their feedback with these projects.
That's absolutely right. The reason that we're able to do the air quality impact analysis is because of the equity strategies effort and the way that we've built up that group and the work that they're doing. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the mechanism to be able to do that. So we're bringing on that expertise, and through that effort, our internal staff, our environmental staff, will be trained on how to do that in the future, and that will be part of our ongoing future power plans. So it's because of that effort that we have the ability to do that.
So that dovetails also to my second question about the ensuring that there's participation of our low-income communities in terms of the thinking about the energy transmission projects that we have. Is that also in the works?
Commissioner, did you say the energy transmission projects or transition projects?
No, transmission.
Transmission.
Is there participation by our low-income communities in terms of giving the feedback when we're thinking about our transmission projects?
I'll have to get back to you on that. I'm sorry that I don't have the information on that. I would imagine that absolutely, but I just don't know what our strategy is with respect to the transmission projects. James or Reiko, if you know, otherwise we'll get back to you on that one.
I would just say that the transmission projects that we're talking about are reconductoring and upgrading. They're not brand new corridors, so they'd be using the existing right-of-ways.
Okay.
And I'd like to add a component to what Jason said. One of the important components of the NREL study was looking at total emission impacts throughout the basin. And no matter the scenario, the impacts from power generation were minimal in comparison to other sources of pollution within the basin. It was really a tiny component, no matter.
So I have my questions. A few of them are similar to, or observations are similar to those of Commissioner Reyes with respect to some of the information presented on slide 12, where you've indicated that you've got advisory group feedback on capital expenditures and costs, particularly customer costs to electrify, which in the equity strategy study is often referred to as debt burden. Or utility debt burden at the end of the day, the explore low load sensitivities impact rates, and obviously the environmental justice pieces. I understand NREL is supporting both studies. I know that they're partnered with UCLA on the LA 100 equity strategies, but I'm curious as to, or just very interested in making sure that the information that's being generated relative to these questions, regardless of which study they're supporting, is being shared, so that we're not, operating in any kind of silos with respect to who's got access to what. curious, Jason, about what you said in terms of the LA 100 equity strategy study enabling the look at local air quality impacts and how that's occurring. Is it that that particular issue is coming up in both places and the actual the work on that is being performed as a part of the equity strategies work and then will be shared with the LRP? Mm-hmm. Is that the way that, so we're sort of blending assignments so that we're not doing independent work on the same questions?
Absolutely right. So when the equity strategies effort kicked off, it was part of the scope to look into local air quality impacts. The LA 100 study did not look at neighborhood level air quality impacts, but recommended that we do. And part of that was for the reason that Dr. Pickle mentioned, which is the vast majority of the local air quality emissions come from the transportation sector electrification, and that at a very, very small portion of it comes from the natural gas emissions. So it helps us understand where those impacts are and where those benefits are. And so to your point of working across divisions and across the power system, that's absolutely right. So this is not being reinvented. It is because of that contract that was set up with equity strategies through NREL that we're able to support what the advisory group is asking us to do with respect to looking at local air quality impacts.
I'm interested in, there was this note on slide 14 that mentioned major that talked about legislative relief. So, and I think that the way it was phrased was in addition to legislative relief, this is for the construction of those transmission lines, that we were also pursuing, other work. Are we seeking legislative relief with respect to, I'm just not aware of it. So is there some effort underway to secure some sort of legislative solution to challenges with respect to transmission bills or permitting?
Yeah, so with respect to transmission, we recognized really early on that the amount of local transmission that we had to do under the existing timelines that it takes to actually build and permit and so on, we just simply wouldn't be able to do all of that in the time that we needed to do it. And so we started to engage a lot of folks a number of years ago at the state legislature and inform them of that. And it really came down to two potential areas. And I say potential because, to answer your question, I don't have the current status on what our active efforts are. I think it might be more sort of monitoring and sort of engaging informally, but we'll have to get back to you on what our specific engagement is. But it really comes down to agency coordination, looking at different state agencies to make sure that we have predictable timelines. Part of the key is not just how long it takes, but the predictability, because to be able to do all of these projects, you need to sequence them. Mm-hmm. When we're upgrading certain stations, when we're taking transmission lines out, we need to have a really tightly scheduled schedule to be able to do that, and uncertainty really hurts that. And the other piece of this that we think may provide some potential, some serious benefit is to have some confined timelines around the CEQA process, not to bypass CEQA, but to do something similar to what some stadium bills have done. So to get specifically to your question, I don't know what the current status is of our engagement, except that we have largely been educating a lot of legislators with respect to the fact that unless certain things change, unless our ability to do this quicker changes, we won't have the ability to actually build all of that transmission in the time that we need to do it in order to achieve these goals.
So, and I asked that question because there was also a comment that, in consultation with major projects, or this is all being sort of monitored by or pulled together in major projects, that we see no obstacles to this particular element of LA 100, of the LA 100 implementation. And I was I was interested in that because that doesn't seem to align with at least what I understand, which is that getting these 10 projects built in the time frame that we have allotted without some intervention somewhere is that we don't have a high degree of confidence that we can do that.
So are you suggesting or saying that you had heard that we do have the ability to actually do those under existing circumstances?
That was the exact words. I wrote them down. major projects, no obstacles. So I was curious, did you mean no obstacles from a planning perspective
Oh,
versus
no, I
implementation?
think I meant identifying obstacles so that we could, know that something's going
you
wrong
meant
and
that
we could
there's
plan
no-
around it, yeah.
Well, except that
I might
the
have missed-
obstacle right now is that under current circumstances, like, because it's not that there's any, I mean, we could build them, but we can't build them on time, right? Without some intervention.
So that is correct. Given the existing historical actual data that we've seen, the actual projects that we built, we don't believe that we'll be able to do this in the timeframe that we need to unless there is change.
I know, and the reason that I think it's important for us to be really clear is there are a lot of stakeholders in this process, and we're all collaborating, fingers crossed, toward a common goal. And there are things that we control and there are things that we don't control. And it would be useful for any number of those stakeholders to be really clear about those things that we don't control, where they may be useful or where it might be useful for them to direct some of their advocacy for solutions. And so it's important that we not convey a sense of inadvertently a sense of confidence in our ability to achieve something without a significant caveat, that being, but not within the time frame that we say is required in order to, and to the extent that all of this has to come together, and I can continue to try to understand, like, what can we miss and still deliver? Does this all really have to come together? Or are there pieces that don't necessarily have to come together? But every time you present this, you present these transmission upgrades as something that needs to happen in order for us to be able to reliably import the renewables. And if that's the case, then in addition to continuing to hold the department's feet to the fire, and I think that, we're pretty well singed, we're good. We've walked across the hot coals, we're on the other side with them. So in addition to that it becomes very important for folks to appreciate that there are other agencies and other players in this arena that need to be properly educated about their role in making this possible. So I just wanted to clarify that because what I heard didn't align with what I thought I understood about it. So I assume I'm correct about that. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm interested in the status of the Ihrp, the Integrated Human Resource Plan. I should never use acronyms. I know that that's being worked on. Can you tell me when that'll be ready?
Yeah,
I don't have the schedule for that. My understanding was that it was going to be about this springtime, but I don't know what the delivery date is, but we can certainly circle back and get you a firm date.
Okay, and then there was another piece about, and I just again want to be super transparent about distribution investments. Because there was a comment made, I mean, that last slide is a scary slide as it relates to distribution, and I know that we've had a far more extensive presentation about where we are and where we need to get. When we look at I guess it's the next to the last slide, risk factors relative to distribution, and it's just that you made the comment that we were evaluating the needs and the costs related to the scaling that we have to do in this arena in order to deliver again. And this is an essential part of delivering with respect to the loads that are necessary for electrification, right? I mean, this is another one of those must do or else. And you indicated that once we had identified those costs, that they would be included in the power budget. And I wrote the word maybe with a big circle and lots of exclamation points because we are continuing to evaluate all of this as it relates to cost, debt burden, equity, impact on rates.
Right.
And we've got to get all of that work completed before we can, and to make sure that we can budget in order to, literally, in order to pay for it all. So I get nervous every time we talk about this, and I know that I'm in some way reflecting back what has to be anxiety within the department every time we talk about this, because the only thing that changes is the date on the calendar and the lessening of the time period between now and 2035. I think it is just critically important that we speak with extreme urgency about the need to understand cost, understand rate structure, and understand what it will take and how we'll finance this, and not speak as if it's a fait accompli, because we're a long way from that, very long way from fait accompli. Not because it's not possible. And LA 100, as as is oft stated here, showed that it was possible. The hard work in terms of how to actually implement that is what didn't get done. And we've just got to be very emphatic as we do this work as to what we control and what we don't, and where we need help and who needs to come to the table to help us. And that includes other city leaders, that includes state leaders. Again, the department's there, and it includes external stakeholders, and their insistence that others show up to meet the commitments that we've made with respect to performing and implementing this work. And then finally, I just want to acknowledge corporate strategy and communications. It seems in presentation after presentation after presentation, there's a role that our corporate strategies and communications group is playing in organizing and facilitating and communicating. And it's a big job that's being done by a relatively small division. And I just wanted to acknowledge that and to say that it is going to become even more important as we move forward. So we want to keep strategically thinking about the role of communication, of outreach at a multitude of levels, because we have to have broad conversations with the public. We have to have targeted conversations with certain stakeholders and policymakers, and very sophisticated conversations with people that want to engage us on issues, especially, the green hydrogen situation, I think, is one that's very apropos. Jason, you started this presentation by, talking about the research that we did and the leadership that this department displayed, and how it was in part kicked off by the sensitivity and the resistance to repowering scattergood. And as I heard all of that, what jumped into my mind was, again, another sort of effort to be incredibly transparent. What every study has shown is that we must have reliable, on-demand, in-basin generation to run our system, period, full stop. And, the clear path to that is not yet apparent. We are planning into the future, but in planning into the future, we cannot ever sacrifice on-demand, real-time, reliable in-basin generation and ensure operational reliability and resiliency. That's just bottom line. And these are tough conversations. They're nuanced conversations. I want to assert that, at least on behalf of this department, that they're conversations that we're engaging in in transparency and in good faith, as we both plan into the future, do everything we can to help make the market for the future. But honestly, none of us know where this is all going to land. And we have to be able to recognize good faith on our part and insist upon and compel and, and work with external stakeholders who are also acting in good faith. And everybody's got to get comfortable with some level of ambiguity, because it just is when you're working toward the future. So communication, again, and good stakeholder engagement and conversations that are taking place at every level will be critical to our success long term. I said a lot, I'm sorry. So we can move on to the next presentation unless there's
May
more.
I add a couple
Absolutely,
things?
sir.
The LA 100 study, NREL characterized the 100% renewables by 2035 as a stretch case. And our scenarios, case one is that stretch case, and then we stretch some more and we try stretching even more. Our scenarios are not representing a full range of reality. We try to compensate with for the reality check by doing scenarios on things like how fast is load going to grow, other things like that. But as the last 3 years have taught us, more than one thing goes wrong at once. And it would be really helpful to have a case that considered starts off with a zero growth case. And we don't know what might cause that zero growth. We could have a lot of electric vehicles, but we could have a lot of solar installations behind the meter at the same time and have no net load growth. So, and the difference between a sensitivity is you're looking at one thing changing at a time. The benefit of scenarios is you're changing a bunch of things at once to paint a whole picture. We're not painting a full, more pessimistic picture as part of the scenarios. So we really need perhaps a case that looks like something in the range of or similar to SB 100, but with less load growth. And the things that come with it, along with the supply chain problems, that seem to be getting worse rather than getting better. So I think we need to have that component of an additional, call it a realist scenario or a pessimist scenario, but something that incorporates more of that list of risk factors that you went through at the end, but all in one scenario.
Yeah, I think we'll have to circle back with you to get a little bit more detail on what we could do given the time that we have. I will say that your risk is, I think you're being polite with how big of a risk that is. I think if we look at the load growth from a couple of years ago that we estimated to today, it's about 20% below. So a lot of that is COVID, but a lot of that is energy efficiency. A lot of that is a slower uptake in electric vehicles. So
for all the California utilities have had a decline in load over the past decade, and to forecast growth is to forecast a hockey stick. And any modeler, planner looks at a hockey stick and goes, "Uh-oh, is that going to happen?" And we really have to be very realistic about these changes.
We will address that concern the exact way we do it. I think we ought to probably meet to make sure that the way that we're trying to address it sufficiently gets to what you're talking about. But I can tell you that we take that risk very seriously and agree with you that that is a major risk factor. And if we don't see, to just underscore this, if we don't see that load growth that we are projecting, it means higher rates. So that's what's at stake. That's why it's so important to look at that load growth. So we will follow up with you to figure out how best to do that given the runway that we have left.
Yeah, well, I understand. COVID's caused sleep problems. I bet SLTRP does too.
Thank you very much. This has been very helpful, and I look forward to the next update. And thank you, Dr. Pickle. Appreciate it. Presentation 4, legal fees and other costs related to the billing system meltdown several years back.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Ann Santilli, Chief Financial Officer. If we could go to the next slide. So in response to the Board Resolution 22097, myself and the Chief Accounting Employee have reviewed the Department's financial records to determine ratepayer funds spent between September 1st, 2013 through December 31st, 2021, in connection with any matter including investigations stemming from our related to the customer billing system implementation, litigation against PricewaterhouseCoopers, the customer class action litigation, and all subsequent legal costs incurred for representation in the class action proceedings following discovery of the Jones conflicts, including expenditures for substitute class counsel, special master investigations, and the U.S. Attorney's investigation for the above matters, and the Aventador contract and subsequent related contracts related to Ardent. So in the interest of full transparency, we've included in our report the hours that could be tracked back to payments, the names of the firms, and either they represented the department or the city of Los Angeles. Next slide. So through our work, we've come up with a little over $122.5 million in expenditures. The first one on the slide is the Ardent Cyber Solutions. The expenditure was a little over $4.3 million, and all of those costs were billed by Ardent. There was no sub-consultant cost for that, and a little over 14,000 hours billed to the department. The next one was the Aventador contract, $21,895,000, all paid to that firm with over 50,000 hours and no sub-consultant provided. The next one that we identified was Barkovich and Yap for $459,000, no sub-consultants for them, and 1,570 hours.
And are they lawyers?
They are actually special masters for bill review, and their costs continue, I believe. The next one is Paul Bender Consulting for $658,000 for 2,268 hours. All of that was their firm. They have additional employees under them, but no sub-consultant invoices.
And what work did they provide?
They are the court monitor. And I will ask Joe Bradich to assist in any explanations I cannot provide, but that's the court monitor that's been reviewing the department's work.
And are they still engaged by the department?
I believe they are.
Are they still working on this project?
I don't believe Bender is. I believe Bender's term expired. And again, just to be clear, Bender was not engaged by the department.
It was a cost of monitoring the settlement. Is that correct?
Correct.
And these payments were made by the department.
Thank you.
The next one is Concentric Energy Advisors for $393,000 for a little over 1,000 hours. These are attorneys who are also looking over the settlement. The next one is
And who are they engaged by?
Concentric was engaged by the new class counsel to evaluate and overlook the settlement to make sure the payouts were done correctly, and also review the payments that were made. They were the folks who helped sign off on the execution of the payouts.
Okay.
The next vendor the department had was Lance Kroner for $21.9 million. And from there, 19.2 million was paid to Lance Kroner. But then there were two consultants he had included in his billings, Paul Bender Consulting for $2,453,000, and then Barkovich and Yap for another $279,000. I do have copies of these invoices, and I can include the hours in my final report.
So was then Bender's firm paid both as a monitor independent of his relationship with Land Kroner, and then in addition to that?
After Lance Kroner was no longer special counsel, the Bender payments were made directly to Bender. At one time, they were made through Lance Kroner, and the same is true for Special Master Barkovich and Yap.
I see. Okay.
The next attorney firm was Hodgman, Salkin, Tusher, and Perez for $4.3 million, and they had another firm below them, Alvarez and Marsal Disputes firm. So out of that, Hodgman was $3.3 million, but then Alvarez was paid at $1 million, and their hours are listed as well as 4,600 hours for Hodgman and 2,397 for Alvarez.
And the services they were providing?
Hodgman was the special master appointed by the court, and Alvarez was a forensic subconsultant.
So this team was responsible for the special master's report that was issued?
That is correct.
Okay.
The next firm is Ellis George, that we have paid $11,709,000, and of that amount, $10,242,000 was retained by them for 19,180 hours of work. But we noticed several other firms that provided invoices to them that were reimbursed. Stroh's Freeberg Professional Services, I understand that's a data consultant. David Cameron Carr, an ethics attorney. Alan Barnes and Jones, another attorney. Litnomics, financial and economic experts for $85,000. And then there were court mediators for $41,000. That was paid through this contract, but we understand that there's probably a few more dollars in that area paid through the legal trust fund that we're going to review as well.
Thank you.
On the next slide, KCC Class Action Services, this was a firm that the department hired to administer the class action payments. So we paid $17.8 million in expenditures. $9.3 million of it was funds used by KCC for this process for 33,118 hours, and then refunds of $8,530,000. The department has refunded just under $108 million for everything in this litigation, and the new rule is how far we can back bill. Of that $108 million, this $8.5 million is part of that, where we couldn't do a bill credit. We had to do a check to a customer. And there is a few more dollars in that area.
I'm sorry, I just want to understand that part. So essentially, the department, when you say refund to a customer, there's a difference between, so when you say a credit, are those monies that were paid to the department that they were then prospectively or retroactively crediting? So we're not giving them money, we're simply saying you overpaid us, so this is your credit?
They overpaid us and they're no longer our customer.
No, that's for these folks. Oh. But you said that we...
the $108 million was money that we had billed these customers, and we found that we either overbilled them or we didn't bill them timely, and so we had to provide a refund, a bill credit to reduce the billing. They may have not paid it, or if they did pay it, they'd have a bill credit on their bill that would be applied to their next bill.
Okay, because there's a difference between a credit, because we're just correcting the bill, and a refund, because when I think of at least in my mind, right, when I think of a refund, it means I gave someone money and they're giving it back to me. When I think of sort of a credit, or a bill correction, you overbilled me, And you had to fix
108
it.
million of bill corrections because we either billed them wrong because of the billing system, because of estimation or something else, or we have to bill now within 6 months of when the customer starts service. And if we don't do our part and get that bill out in 6 months, we have to forego any billings. So if we didn't do our part, we have to refund or credit the customer back that amount.
Yeah, so essentially we spent $9 million to give back 8.5 million.
Those are checks.
No, I understand.
Yes.
No, because again, that's an actual refund. So basically we identified, up to 85 or $8.5 million that weren't owed to us that we collected. And we had to spend $9 million to give it back.
And KCC, they were the administrators of the class action lawsuit, so they sent out letters letting customers know were they entitled to no credit, there's nothing wrong with their bills, or, they had a lot of upfront work to close out the issues. So they sent out letters to all of our customers saying, based on a review of your bills, you'll be receiving a credit of, it could be $0 or a different dollar amount. So they handled all of that. So they were
administering not just the actual return of money, but they were also doing the work associated with identifying or communicating with those folks who had credits that they would be receiving and sort of sorting through all of that.
Credits with all of our customers. They would be communicating with our customers, yes.
Okay.
The next one is KPMG. So as part of the class action settlement, we had to have 2 audits done. And KPMG was hired to do a review of the billing system to say if the billing system worked or not and what issues they found. Their reports were then shared with the court to communicate what was working and what we needed to adjust. And then the next one is LEHRER. It was another legal firm for $4.1 million. And of that, $3,770,000 was retained by them for 10,272 hours worth of work. They also had Stroh's Fritzberg Professional Services. This firm actually was one of the original firms that ended up closing. And so the same subconsultant was continued on.
Weren't they acquired by Brown George?
They were not acquired by Brown George. Some of the partners from Brown George went to, some of the partners from LEHRER went to Brown George, some went to another firm.
But the partner with who had the DWP business went to Brown George.
Correct.
Okay.
So the best way to say it would be that the Brown George contract came about after the LEHRER dissolution to follow the partners that were handling the work.
Okay.
And then Paradis Law Group had $6 million worth of billings and no subconsultant billings for 13,463 hours. And then
and that work wasn't for legal work, correct?
That is correct. That was with respect to the remediation work that was done under a contract and then an amendment to that contract.
Okay.
And then the last one is Oracle. From communications with city attorney, Oracle was doing various work for us to determine the amount of refunds to do system work. So $26.6 million. I do have copies of those invoices, and we can accumulate those hours.
That's a lot of money. That's not just chopped liver. That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. And yeah, it's a lot of money.
Not just chump change.
And you indicated that you are continuing to review.
We mark this as preliminary. We just want to do a review of the legal trust fund to capture any other mediation costs or any smaller costs that were related to this that are not part of this. And we'll also, for the invoices that we didn't capture the hours, we'll put that in there as well. wrap this up this month.
Thank you. And if you could just submit the final as a filed report, that would be terrific. Are there any questions or comments? Commissioner Berard, any additional comments? It's a lot of money.
That's not just chump change.
That's
Commissioner Reyes.
zip.
Oh, she's playing Switzerland, okay.
Yeah, I think, obviously, it's a lot to absorb. I mean, it's a very big number. Among the things that strikes me is the critical importance of keeping a dashboard with respect to legal fees. It's, among the challenges when you're managing a public agency is that you are often, there's the cost associated with problem solving, particularly when it becomes legal problems, become obscured. And it's difficult to look at what this cost and not to imagine that there could have been a more expedient and less costly approach to resolution. There are a lot of people who made a lot of money, and we won't even begin to deal with the rogue nature of some of the firms and individuals or some of the firms associated with this tally of cost. But to have a regular public accounting of how we're spending, this agency and ultimately our ratepayers' money with respect to legal fees, I think is critical, because it's important that we manage not just projects and not just, all of the other things that we do, but that we are managing against our, we're managing these kinds of costs. That's what good businesses do, and they are far more aggressive. Also, we often think about the matters associated with the billing system, failed implementation of that billing system. We know it was costly. We think about it in terms of the numbers we see in the newspaper. We don't see numbers this big. But in addition to that, these costs represent, again, just a fraction of the overall impact on the department's operating efficiency and operating capacity. And so I remain mindful of that. And our multiple failures with respect to both the implementation and the huge mistake of not listening to the internal voices that said slow down on that. And then the tragic mistakes made both from an oversight and also significantly from the perspective of the city attorney's management of this litigation, and the resulting impact on the reputation of the department, trust, both internal and external, and really the significant impacts on morale and trust internal remain incalculable from my perspective. My hope is that by confronting these issues squarely and taking appropriate steps to mitigate and or beyond mitigation to ensure that these failures are not repeated, that allows everyone to get up, face forward, and move on in a way that represents the best of the department and that reflects the actual capacity and the professionalism and the expertise of the people who work here. So I thank you for this report, and will ensure that we, as a part of that motion, that we have a regular report out so that this becomes not these particular numbers, but our utilization of council becomes a regular part of our dashboard, and that we take better steps toward managing these kinds of costs. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have,
The most appropriate follow-up ever.
yes, the gift that keeps on giving.
You have now.
But that which, doesn't kill us makes us stronger, and in this case, makes us better. So we are still standing, and we will move to our final report in this segment from the General Manager regarding our Inspector General.
Thank you very much. This could not be any more fitting follow-up to Ann's report on legal fees. And I do agree. I think one of the tragedies is not having timely information and good feedback for the board, because it's certainly unfair for the board to expect to make decisions without broader context, and that's one of the things I'm hoping we'll be able to continue to bring is regular updates on overall costs, whether it's legal costs or on particular projects and other things, so you can see how these kind of very large but often hidden dollars absolutely affect our bottom line here. With the Inspector General, this position was newly created. As you're aware, the mayor thought it was important to create this position here following the whole episode we just talked about with the fallout from the class action lawsuit, including with our outside counsel, Paul Parody, and the firm that he hired. Understanding at the time the mayor was concerned about this is before we had any idea of how bad this was or how deep it ran. And so certainly in retrospect, with all we've learned in the last couple of months, this has become even more obvious of a need for us to have. The position, because it's not covered in the city charter, becomes basically an exempt employee under the general manager's appointing authority. Because it's unusual in a regular IG structure where there'd be, say, a charter created position like under police or fire, or that they have in LA Metro. We have a dash line responsibility reporting to the board. The intent of that, and I've made it very clear with the IG, is to have full and unfettered communication, collaboration with the board, as well as being part of the senior management team at the department. And I think that I heard a comment yesterday on the radio in regards to the news announcement about the IG, and concerned about is it going to be independence. I'm doing my best to set this up so that this person has enough avenues and enough places to go to be able to act as fully independently as possible, given the structure that we have. And the IG office will have anywhere from 1.5 to 2 people supporting them in a variety of civil service classes, as well as the ability to add contract folks who are helping investigation to the support as may be needed. The duties of the IG were done. They're conducted, let me back up, I apologize. The mayor's office encouraged us to work with an outside vendor, a man named Dan Schnurr, who has been involved in various civic areas, as well as, I believe, education at USC, if I recall correctly, that looking at what the needs of an IG would be and what the duties should be. He conducted a number of interviews, both internally and externally, to put together a document. The idea for the basic duties, so the internal Inspector General would conduct and supervise audits, reviews, and analyze our programs, our operations, and our contracts, receive and investigate complaints from all sources, and conduct investigations, certainly concerning alleged abuse, fraud, and waste, either internally or could be externally as well, as we need to investigate. Provide independent analysis and evaluation appraisals of our performance effectiveness. To me, this is a valuable piece of being part of the senior management team, is helping us to do our job better, providing an independent set of eyes into everything that we do to help us to improve as an agency all the way around, and then to report on all those investigations, audits, and other activities, and coordinate both to report publicly and report to the board on a regular basis. They're providing leadership and coordination in policy changes or remedial actions that we need to do to correct deficiencies. I assume that along the lines of what we've just heard about legal fees, that the IG would have some recommendations in short order for the board. In looking at systemic issues and steps to be taken to prevent problems in the future. Recognize we can't stop everything, but we can put as stronger programs in place as we can to try to prevent problems in the future, and then also situations to react quickly when we are aware of those and to do a better job of following through on those. The IG will have the ethics department, ethics office, which is a very small office which needs to grow, report to them. That has to do with ethics compliance in the city, and it also charges coordinating with other offices in the city, agencies, even district attorney and whoever, LAPD, when there's a suspected criminal behavior or other violation. The office is structured to have an audit team, have the ethics office, our corporate performance office, corporate protection and risk analysis, and office of special investigation. The next slide is the org chart. I've probably gone way faster than the slides. Sorry, Rachie. If I go to the org chart, one more slide. Thank you. So this is a basic structure. The structure would be the Inspector General would have direct reports overseeing audit. There is an internal audit group under Ann that will need to continue to do financial audits, and they do contract audits during contracting to make sure that change orders are done correctly, that we're getting what we paid for. Some of the contracts involve other parties, maybe through a JPA. The audits for this group, I'm looking for particularly compliance audits with department policies, complying with our rules and regulations and the policies we have set forth. Also audits of how we use the purchasing process, that we're doing things correctly in our bidding processes and our evaluation process, and performance audits of department functions and where we can find areas for improvement. Our ethics office, there's two areas there. One is ethics compliance. We all just did our Form 700s, so there's the ethics compliance and education part, which is keeping the department, both educated and aware, as well as compliant with all the regulations. And then there's a whole area of complaints and investigations. And this is an area that has been somewhat disaggregated, and we're working on, as a matter of fact, we're working currently on the current flow chart to understand where complaints go and where complaints don't complete the process. And so the IG would be responsible for making sure that all complaints are investigated and followed up on, and there's a report back. They also have corporate performance, which is part of FSO now. I believe corporate performance, besides doing the IEA survey and other industry surveys, should be a valuable tool, is being used as a yardstick for how we perform on a regular basis. And so my goal is to put corporate performance under the IG as a regular use as a measuring stick for how the department does overall. Corporate protection and risk analysis is a new concept. This is something that we'll need to develop with the IG. This concept is really stepping back and looking at where the department has exposure, where we need to assess the risks, and to look objectively at the actions that we take and the policies that we have, and to try to make improvements so that we don't have places that we could be vulnerable, either internally or externally. And then the last part would be security services, OSI. OSI works for Chris Vicino. They're an important part at times of his management structure, but largely a lot of the work that they do in investigations will be it'll be directed and reviewed with the Inspector General. That'll be one of the investigative arms that he'll have available to him. OSI has done a number of investigations. They've daylighted criminal investigations in the past, and work on behalf of groups throughout the department where there's a perceived or expected wrongdoing. So we did have an announcement come out, and I sent the board an announcement. We have an Inspector General. His name is Sergio Perez. He will start May 9th. He's extremely excited to be here. He's got a nice, broad background. He is a lawyer by trade. He's grew up locally in Los Angeles. He lives within view of the building. He's currently heads up the Office of Independent Review in Orange County, which was part of Orange County getting out of the issues that they had down there. He worked for the Ethics Department, Ethics Commission in the city of LA prior to that. He worked for the County Inspector General. He worked for the Attorney General of California and the Department of Justice. He has a broad variety of experience, a tremendous attitude about helping us to become the best department we can be. And he's a very good communicator and a great collaborator. I've never been so excited to have someone who could help look over my shoulder and to make sure that, that everything that I do and my staff does is executed with the utmost integrity. When he gets here, we will have a number of people who will transfer in, who'll have some positions to fill. And then I'm sure he'll, when discussing both Joe and Selmo and Nancy and I did the interviews, unanimously believed he was the right person for this job. And when he gets here, he believes in cross-functional teams. He's led investigations personally. He led teams doing investigations. And so I'm sure he'll have some slight rearranging of this, but we'll have him off to what I think is a very good start. And he's anxious to meet all the board members and to see how he could be of service. So that's my report. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I am extremely pleased with who we have coming on board, and I hope the board is too.
Any questions or comments on this item?
Just a question. Based on Mr. Perez's experience and qualifications, did he see with the scope of work that we have, maybe he has other ideas or
Yes.
feedback regarding the org chart and the scope of work?
Yes, we
Be
actually
applicable.
put that out in when the recruiter did recruiting. They had that description and the org chart, and so it gives them a definition of the job. Interestingly, candidates for the job were interested in reporting the relationship and their level of independence and act independently. And so he had, all the candidates had questions for us about how this job would be executed. But he was aware of that. And then, this organization is new to us, but not new to someone like him. And so, he clearly has ideas of how to staff it and evolve it correctly. And within both civil service classes he has available to him, and then also where he may need to contract out for other work, especially investigating matters, auditing, really looking into it. And it's interesting because, there's certainly an oversight compliance watchdog piece of this. Another important piece to me is being able to be a resource that helps every other senior management member do the best job they can by providing, someone who can say, is this right? Are we doing this correctly? Why are we not bidding this? The day in and day out thing, we have processes and policies in place, and looking at how we're living up to those, or where we need to put new policies in place to strengthen the structure of the organization.
Did he have any background with Paul Parody or
No, none at all.
any of the characters that we dealt with?
No, none at all. If he did, it would have been from a prosecutorial side, because he worked for DOJ as a trial attorney in 2 different accounts, including consumer affairs and another area. So
Okay.
he would have been only on the other side of the fence from them. So,
All right.
yeah.
I don't want to find out that they're his cousins.
No. Not at all.
Very good. So I have a couple of observations.
Yes.
So first, pleased to see the retention of an inspector general. Curious about the org chart. So we'll be looking forward to collaborating and understanding more his perspective. Also interested in who drew this particular org chart, because I come from another city commission that had an inspector general, and a commission where the general manager, as in this case, reports directly to the board.
Oh, that's a good point.
In looking at this org chart, you would imagine that the Board of Water and Power Commissioners is on the same line as the general manager, and that's just not the case.
That was an oversight on my part. It should have been above with a line
Little
down
bit.
and a dash line around. So,
Kind of, sort of.
my apologies.
But it really does get back to overall culture and oversight, and a institutional lack of not embrace, but really not a strong sense of presence, I think, by the board, leading to a rather lax appreciation for the actual organization of the Department of Water and Power. So that's one. Then secondly, as part of the oversight structure and the other entity that the Inspector General will need to establish a strong working relationship with, it would be our Office of Ratepayer Advocate, or Office of Public Accountability, which is another essential element to the oversight structure of the organization. In my previous role, the Inspector General would have been the third piece of that and would have reported directly to, and did report directly to the board. In this case, that is not the case, but I think we would be getting off to to not observe these little pieces would just put us off on the wrong foot. So it's critical that there be full appreciation for both the ultimate organizational structure and that it be presented that way all the time. I've noticed that on almost everything I see, the organizational structure here starts with the general manager and flows down. And that is simply not the way this organization is set up. So we don't want to reflect it that way moving forward. And then I just also have to say that there is a healthy tension between the role of Inspector General and the roles of others within an agency. And that's going to be an interesting line to walk. It's hard to be, sort of an in-house advisor and also to have the distance and the skepticism necessary for independent oversight. And so we don't want to see, one person as the end-all and be-all. And I think that those distinctions will get, again, clearer as the entire picture comes, as the entire picture emerges. Super excited to welcome him aboard. And I am pretty confident that this is yet another brick in the wall that this department is building to keep at bay corrosive forces that might seek to undermine our efforts, be they inside or external. So I'm happy about that and look forward to, to this next step. So thank you for getting this wrapped up. And I know the mayor is also extremely pleased that this piece of additional accountability is in place. So. Is there anything else? Then I think we've got, we can move on to J. Are there any questions or comments about any items that are on file? Seeing none, we have item K1. Are all the commissioners present eligible to vote on the approval of minutes? I assume we were all at the March 8th meeting. So is there a recommendation with respect to, or a motion with respect to approval of minutes?
So moved.
Second, would you please call the roll?
President McCLAIN-HILL,
Aye.
Vice President Reyes,
Aye.
Commissioner BARAD Hopkins,
Aye.
3 ayes.
Motion
Motion
passes.
passes.
Thank you so very much. I think that concludes our open session agenda and that we can move into closed session at this time. Mr. Brejovich.
Great. At this time, we will then recess in a closed session to deal with agenda items M1 through M5. And in accordance with California Government Code Section 54957.1, we will report any final actions taken therein. We are in recess.
Can I ask you a question, please?
Could we have our, is it regarding this agenda item?
Yes.
Or me, not agenda item, we're about to go into closed session, so should we wait until we are in closed session and have Reggie close down our mics?
It's item 12 on the agenda, a closed session.
There's no item 12 on the closed session agenda.
Oh.
Okay. There's an item 12 on the open session agenda, which was passed, and that resolution, Commissioner, just applied to our telecommuting
Yes.
findings.
So we can still do that.
Yes, we can. We did not set this meeting as a meeting where we're telecommuting, so commissioners are appearing in person, as is our staff. This allows for us to continue to have the public telecommute, because, to have the public phone into our meetings, because we're not allowing for public participation.
Okay.
So we are still hybrid in that regard.
Okay.
Okay? All right, so with that, we will go into closed session and recess. Reggie, would you please prepare for that? And in the meantime, everyone who is not a part of closed session can vacate the room. I think we will stay here for closed session. And mics are live until Reggie tells us they're not.
Get them. Stand by, please.